Good afternoon. I'm Edith Auchter from Citizens for Conservation up in the Barrington area, and I'm here to talk about educating and engaging future stewards through citizen science. So historically in the Barrington area, nature education, which did begin at home, was brought to the schools some 90 years ago. In 1932, the Garden Club of Barrington actually hired a gentleman to teach nature in the elementary school in Barrington Hills. And about 40 years later, the Garden Club of Barrington and the Little Garden Club of Barrington coordinated to recruit Wendy Paulson as nature lady and to bring the benefits of nature education to all of our elementary schools in the Barrington area. Today, we have over 10 nature ladies who visit each of our 8 elementary schools 3 times a year, bringing kindergarten to 2nd, or in some case, 3rd grade students, programs. We borrow exhibits from the Field Museum or the Chicago Botanic Garden, have lots of hands-on activities for the children. And they really enjoy their nature walks, planting wildflowers to attract pollinators, and also building habitat for birds. And some 30 years after that, Richard Love wrote the book, Last Child in the Woods, subtitled Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And in this book, the author links the lack of nature in the lives of today's wired generation to some disturbing childhood trends, such as obesity, attention disorder, and also depression. And out of this sprung the No Child Left Inside movement in the United States that sought to encourage and provide funding for environmental education. And the goals include enhancement of environmental literacy from kindergarten through 12th grade, as well as fostering an understanding, analysis, and solution to environmental challenges. During COVID, I imagine many of you had an extreme increase in visitation to your preserves and outdoor areas as people were realizing that direct exposure to nature was essential, especially for healthy childhood development, but also for all of us as we dealt with physical and emotional health of not only the children, but also adults during COVID. So about a decade ago, the Barrington School District 220 conducted a science curriculum review. And they decided at that point in time that to adopt field studies for each grade level, 1st through 5th grade. You can see they cover aquatic and terrestrial habitats, life cycle of insects, prairie ecosystem, diverse ecosystems and stewardship, and an outdoor education experience. So here in Illinois, it made tremendous sense for the children to learn more about Illinois' history, and especially in the 3rd week of September, when we celebrate Illinois, the Prairie State. And so from this, a new collaboration was formed, and an educational foundation in our community provided initial funding for a collaborative effort between District 220 and Citizens for Conservation that provides an opportunity for children to engage in the authentic work of doing science in Barrington's distinctive environment of prairie and marshland. Along with classroom curriculum, the students have the opportunity to be citizen scientists and connect more with the natural world. And so out of this collaboration, we also have realized how much the students are involved in science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So a little bit about the scope of the program. I mentioned that we have 8 elementary schools, so that tallies up to about 700 students per school, or throughout the 8 schools, plus their teachers and chaperones. And we only have 2 classes come out, so maybe somewhere around 50 students at a time. And they're spending 2 hours on the prairie. And Citizens for Conservation provides the equipment that I'll talk a little bit about as we go on. You'll see children with hand lenses and carpenter rulers and clipboards and crayons and pencils. And we also coordinate 40 volunteers, about 8 to 10 of whom are on the site at any one given time. And in addition to the field study, we also deliver an in-class orientation so that the students know what the scope of work for them will be. So the sites that we visit include Flint Creek Savannah, which is a Citizens for Conservation property, about 150 acres. And among things that the children are encouraged to think about is, why is it important to preserve prairies? And Citizens for Conservation Grigsby Prairie, about 44 acres. What is my role in prairie preservation? And we also visit Cook County Forest Reserve, either Spring Creek Prairie or Galloping Hill Prairie, where students think about, how does preservation change the natural? And as we enter the classes and provide some basic information about prairies, we're excited to see that many of the children have already read Little House on the Prairie, and they have some concept about the wide open spaces that we used to have here in Illinois, where 2/3 of our state was covered by prairie and ultimately became agricultural land. And we talk about some of the features of these plants that enable them to survive in the prairie environment. And so they all really enjoy the Deep Roots poster that they see not only in the classroom, but we also have out in the field on the drawing and measuring area. We have several graphics that they really find fascinating. And we also talk about some of the ecosystem benefits, how prairies help improve water quality, and they anchor the soil. So many of the students have heard about a dust bowl and how topsoil can be blown away. And the prairies providing wildlife habitat, resting places for grassland birds who are migrating. And then also how carbon is sequestered. And then something that they have not heard before is how endangered the tallgrass prairie is as an ecosystem. You know, many students think about the jungle and rainforests, but when we bring it close to home, a lot of them wonder how they can help. And so this is where we introduce that concept of stewardship and let them know how we are all volunteers and that these prairies are not remnant prairies. These prairies, in fact, have been cultivated and restored in some cases. And while the students are out visiting with us on their field study, we have 3 components to their time with us. So they each spend 35 minutes or so on each of 3 activities: a discovery walk, a measuring and drawing component, as well as seed collecting. So on the discovery walk, the students are encouraged to look for special adaptations. We're also encouraging them to look at the diversity, and many of them comment that when they're in the prairie, they see so many different species than they would observe in a park or a playground or their school property. And in fact, in 2015, I believe it was, Barrington was celebrating its sesquicentennial. And so as coordinator, I thought, ooh, wouldn't it be fun with all these children if we could get them to identify 150 different grasses, forbs, any kind of wildlife, insects, whatever they happened to see during their visits. And we were very pleased that we came up with 132. So we didn't quite make the target of 150 for the sesquicentennial, but I think the children were amazed at the amount of diversity that they experienced in their visits to the prairie. So as I mentioned, they're looking also for unique characteristics and structures that enable some of these. In this case, we're focusing on the grasses and the forbs. And so we've already mentioned the long root system. We also have the children feel the top of a compass plant leaf and then feel down just where the stem meets the leaf. And they are surprised at that temperature difference that they can feel, and they can explain how the real cool water deep down is being pulled up by the roots and how they can feel that chill in the leaf. They also are encouraged to use all of their senses. You know, we have them smelling things and touching things. We discourage tasting, although later on you'll see some of their questions about that. But they're using all of their senses, and they really enjoy listening to the grasses when the wind comes through. And so they certainly learn much about the diversity as well as these different characteristics and structures helping plants survive the prairie. And so these are some of their discoveries. You know, young eyes, they pick up so many things. And so they'll find the leopard frog that's hidden at the base of the tall grasses. They'll also find praying mantids, lots of caterpillars, woolly bears, and they get so excited about finding these things. We also often have sandhill cranes fly over us, and spiders. They enjoy looking at the webs that look like zippers. We usually see one of these Argiops wrap up. It's maybe if it caught a fly or a grasshopper, we see them wrap it up and store it in the web, which is fascinating. At a distance, we saw a coyote, and also just the beautiful flowers that hide in and amongst some of the grasses, including these lovely fringed gentian. So the second activity includes two different components. One is measuring and the other drawing. And so you can see our chaperones and our CFC volunteers. There's Wendy Paulson, in fact, holding on to the carpenter ruler and helping students record data. So it's their job. During the discovery walk, we've introduced quite a few forbs and grasses by name and pointed out how we can distinguish from one species to the next, what types of detail to be looking for. And so the children know when they need a big blue stem or compass plant, they can readily identify those and walk right over to them, and then they record their data. And when they head back to school, they're going to then calculate the average height by summing up and dividing by the total. And so again, we're reinforcing some of those theme fundamentals. And then they also have at their disposal plant height data that's been recorded over the years. So this fall will be our 14th year of the program. And so the students will look at the data they've collected, and this is for compass plant, big blue stem, and rattlesnake master. And as they see the variability from one year to the next, they try to come up with some explanations. Why do we think this happened? Was it particularly wet? Was there a drought? And it's fascinating to hear some of their proposed hypotheses. And then that second component in the measuring and drawing is to do scientific drawings. And so we're encouraging the students at this point, they have hand lenses and they have their crayons, and they're to look for detail. You know, is the stem hairy? Is it smooth? What about the seed pod? And you can see they put little spikes on them, and then they, ooh, they're circular, and they end up realizing that when they brush up next to the plants, that things are sticking to their clothes. And so they talk about how seeds are distributed. And then they also are looking for those unique characteristics and structures that are going to enable these plants to survive in the prairie. They also, when we look at their drawings, we see that on the discovery walk, we've talked to them about whether plants have opposite leaves or alternate leaves. And some of the children's drawings are very clear. This is a cup plant, and how they put the water at the joining point between the opposite paired leaves. And this young lady is drawing the bottle gentian, and they're fascinated to learn about the bumblebee that can actually force its way into that flower to pollinate. And then the third activity that they're involved in is seed collecting. And this often is a favorite of students. They are allowed to wander off the trail. They feel a sense of independence when they get out there. And again, when we ask the students whether it's collecting Indian grass or big blue stem or compass plant, that they are responsible for making sure that the seed that goes into their bag is what we've asked for. And we talk to them about how we process the seed and how we then sow the seed, and how important it is to have special seed mixes depending on if we have the dry, the tall grass prairie, the mesic prairie. And so we want to make sure that the seed that we're collecting is what we expected from them. And we can see that how excited they get. And when they all dump it into the common bag, on the lower photo here, we were collecting compass plant, and how quickly they fill up the large landscape bags. And so they can contribute quite a bit to our stewardship activities. If you figure we have 700 little volunteers out there over the 2-week period, and we try to have them collect a variety of seeds to add to the diversity for our seed mixes. And then they're, when they return to school, they fill out a sheet. And one of the comments is to write about one new thing that they learned today. And so the children are often fascinated with the idea of fire, and they've read about it in Little House on the Prairie. And they have a bit of an understanding about how it's an effective management technique in the prairie to burn off all those dried grasses. And but they still have questions. They burn down the prairie, but since the roots are so deep, the plants regrow. And I learned the compass plant has a sandpaper feel to it. Rattlesnake master rattles if it's dry. Some flowers can smell like mint, and some smell like buttery popcorn. There's a prairie drop seed. And then, of course, there's always a student who listens to absolutely everything and gets back to school and writes about lagoons with bacteria in their roots that make or collect nitrogen and how plants need each other. So it's pretty fascinating to read their review sheets. Then they also write about what their favorite thing is. And some of the overriding themes we're not surprised to see seed collecting, because they do get to see how many seeds come from these plants. One little boy wrote about going blue stem hunting and how they could explore and do this independently. But a big thing also is how the children write about my favorite thing was getting outside and collecting seeds because it was calming and relaxing. And I also felt like I was helping the environment by collecting seeds. And another student wrote about being in nature. He could relax his mind and enjoy the quiet sounds of nature. And then they also talk about some of the wildlife that they've seen. In this case, it was like coyotes and the sandhill cranes, some of the larger animals that they see. But they certainly do enjoy sliding the seeds off of Indian grass. They talk about how calming that is. And then things they wonder about are questions that they have. How are plants and animals a healthy ecosystem if they're eating each other? And then why didn't the main stalk grow on the compass plant this year? Will it next year? And then how did prairies originally come to be? How were they created? Why were they so much bigger so long ago? And of course, one of our favorites is, why did John Deere destroy the prairie? And then also they think about the milkweed plant. How does it attract the monarch butterflies? And is the coyote a loner, or does he perhaps have a family? So it's very interesting to listen about what the children think after we get back to school. Here, these young boys are finishing up their drawings, and they wonder, the animals that live here, why'd they pick the prairie of all the other places? And when the plants come back, did they actually die, or did they just grow again? And you can see some of the other questions that come through. Yes, the year that the compass plants didn't have flowers was a tremendous concern to the kids. And then back in the day, how did people know whether plants were safe to eat or not? And that's why we tell them, please don't eat any of our plants on the prairie. We will smell, we will look, we will listen, we will touch, but let's not eat any. And so what we've noticed over the years is that many of these students will encourage groups to come. And maybe it's their families, maybe it's a Cub Scout or Girl Scout troop. And so here we see that, so this is some 2 months after they were visiting with us in September. Some of the students will come out and help us sow the seed that we've cleaned and put into different mixes. And then other students will have come out and helped us process the seed. We have the drawers with screens that are actually Eagle Scouts made for us, and we clean our seed. And so a little bit, I just want to finish up. I don't expect any of you to read these. They're really way too wordy, but I thought, oh, what the heck, I'm just going to paste this in. And that way, if anyone is interested in some of the details about what we do behind the scenes, well, we have to recruit those 40 volunteers. And so we send out a recruitment email, and we send it to our own members. We send it to Nature Ladies, the garden clubs, Spring Creek Stewards, Prairie Woods Audubon. We put it up on social media and our own e-news update. So we get lots of people who, when they join, they say they'd like to be involved in education activities. So that gives us a perfect opportunity to recruit some folks who enjoy working with young students. And they almost always also are our restoration volunteers. And so they have that tremendous knowledge about stewardship and encourage the students to come back. We also, behind the scenes, set up our scheduling. You can see here's our couple weeks worth of, we have the in-class presentations as well as the field studies. And like I said, we try and get at least 7 or 8 to 10, somewhere in there, volunteers each time that we have. We have an orientation for our volunteers. We provide, the written information to them about what time to meet and what choices they have for responsibilities during their 2 or 4 hour shifts. And then I also mentioned the in-class student orientation. It's really helpful when we're bringing the students out if they have a lot of background about why the prairies are important, absorbing water with their deep roots, providing nectar and pollen, resting places, homes for wildlife, And so we talk a lot about that with them before they come out. And then, but at the end of the day, we almost always hear that this was the best field study ever. So I would like to end the program with my contact information. The CFC general email is cfc@citizensforconservation.org. That was easier to fit on there. Mine's even longer. It says edith.auchter@citizensforconservation.org. So it's too long to display across there. The general email will get popped to me if it's in regards to the Prairie program. So I hope that I've given you some information about how you can encourage stewardship and engage these students in citizen science. And if you have any questions, I am ready to answer them. Thank you very much.